Ken Morgan, thanks so very much. It's time to climb in the Sulky on a Friday night here at the Meadowlands. Dave Little with you, and I'm joined by the National Amateur Driver of the Year 2017, Joe Lee. Joe, thanks for spending a few minutes with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Joe, I want to start, you've been a long-time amateur driver. Well, actually, only about 6 or 7 years, as you told me yesterday. But the fact of the matter is, before we went on camera, you told me about some very interesting travels that you've made as an amateur driver. Tell us about some of the exotic spots in other countries that you've driven in the amateur movement.
I've been invited a couple of times, and so far we've gone to New Zealand, and I've been to Mallorca. Both were great trips. That's one of the things that you can do as the amateur driver. And down in New Zealand, we raced at what was their Meadowlands at Addington, and it was a lot of fun. You get to race like maybe 2 different tracks over the course of 4 or 5 days, and it's just a different experience altogether because the racing is different, the horses are a little different. So.
The amateur driving is not the only time that you do some traveling for racing. I know you love the thoroughbred game. Tell us about going to see the Dubai World Cup too.
Yeah, in 2008, I went to the Dubai World Cup with Aaron Greider, who's a good friend of mine, and he had a chance to race in that, and he asked if I would go as his guest, and so we got to do that. He finished 3rd in the race, but it was a nice experience to do that too.
All right, now we got to turn the page and look at Joe Lee, a harness lifer. And Joe, you told me yesterday that you grew up in the Bronx, and I call this a sign of things to come, as folks will find out with your regular occupation. But you grew up in the Bronx. How did you start with harness racing?
My mom and dad had owned a few trotters when I was a kid, and we used to go to Roosevelt and Yonkers and Freehold quite a bit. And so we always, on the backside of Freehold, and then as a kid I was just always at the racetrack on the weekends as well, always rooting for, all the guys that you grew up watching. So.
Now, you mentioned something about show jumping. Can you tell me something about that? I mean, obviously you're on top of the horse there. You're not in a Sulky.
Sure. So before I ever sat behind one, I rode equestrian for a long time and was in quite a few competitions, and I like jumping the fences, but always being a fan of harness racing, I wanted to see what it was like to sit behind one. And the moment I did, that was the last time I rode one. So.
All right, your first competitive harness race was 7 years ago. Now, you're still a young man at 40 years of age, but yet for 33, maybe that's a little bit late in the game. Why did you get that start, a little bit on the late side?
I had met up with Buzzy Schulte, who gave me a start and let me start jogging and training some of his horses. And then I wanted to get my qualifying license just to see what it was like to go behind the gate. And then after that, I said, this would be fun, and let me see if I can take it to the next level and start racing in some pari-mutuel races. All
right, so you were driving in some races. We go to the second page of our graphics package, and I call this a Yankee Doodle Dandy. You talked to me yesterday about keeping your amateur status due to your busy schedule. Would you consider being a professional driver on a full-time level?
No, I think at this point, I would like to just retain the amateur status. Because my schedule is so busy, I like to have the opportunity to drive in the amateur series when I can, and then when the opportunity presents itself to race in the pro races, I can do that as well, like this evening, in fact.
All right, now we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, Joe, you were the assistant clubhouse manager for the New York Yankees. The thing that I found amazing was you got the job when you were 15 years old. Now, how does that happen?
We were friends with the equipment manager for the New York Yankees at the time, and the strike had just ended in 1994, and he had called up my parents and said, we have a spot open. If you'd like to become a bat boy for the summer, you can have the job. And I did that, and I was there for 3 years as a bat boy and then moved up, and have been there ever since.
Now, you also do some financial planning as well?
I do. I have a financial advisory practice up in Westchester, my group, and there's 5 of us that do that, and I've integrated the financial work with the baseball world, so it's a lot of fun.
Do you ever sleep, Joe? That's the question I have.
I sleep like everyone else, but for racing, I'll always make the time, Try to juggle everything.
Joe, I want to talk a little bit about something that sometimes concerns the patrons here at the Meadowlands.
Right.
And that is amateur races and betting on amateur races.
Sure.
Now, the betting seems to be good in terms of the monies wagered, but sometimes on Twitter you see people critical of having the amateurs participate in some of our bigger events. Like we had a big Pick 5 a couple of weeks ago. 2/5 of the races were for amateurs, and yet we still bet $150,000 into that pool.
Right.
How do you respond to the people who are critical of the amateur racing? From a betting standpoint.
From a betting standpoint, the racing is a little different. I think that the amateurs, sometimes there's not a hole there like there might be in the pro races for everybody. But I think that when I've come into the grandstand afterwards and say, oh, did you watch that first race or did you bet that race? I get a lot of positive feedback. I love the amateur racing. Because they feel like sometimes that these are all the amateurs, maybe maybe the only drive of the week, and they're all out there, going all like nobody wants to let anybody go, and everybody's really out there gunning for the win.
Right.
See? So it is a little different, but at the same time, it's ultra competitive. The guys that we race against, and Hannah Miller and all these people, everybody's looking to win. Everybody's out there just trying to win that amateur race.
Now, you've had some success, obviously. You were the National Amateur Driver of the Year 2017, as we mentioned. You also drive in some professional races. But let's talk about one horse in particular. Let's start with Soul Train. How special was he to you in that 2017 campaign?
He's a nice horse. I got along with him really, really well. Every time, he's real versatile, so he can leave or he can come from the back of the pack. And he usually, every time I'm on the track with him, he shows up for me no matter where we are. It's been from here to Monticello to Yonkers to Saratoga, wherever we're together, he puts in a big effort for me. Yeah.
Now, when you and I spoke yesterday, you told me about a horse at Monticello you won with at odds of 90-1. Just tell us real quick about that.
Yeah, that was in the mud. I had been driving this horse in the pro races. His name was Blowout for Carl Torella, and he had been no good the week before, and then the next week in the mud, we were at the three-quarter pole, and he still had a lot left, and I got up right at the wire and beat Jim Taggart up at Monticello, and I think he was like 92 or 93-1.
I actually checked 91-1, Joe. So hopefully you had a $10 bill on him.
I didn't have anything on him. It was just covered in mud.
Well, that was a great win.
Yeah.
And another great win for you came on last May the 17th with a horse you're driving in tonight's first race. Let's take a look at the stretch run of Justin Verlander. Why don't you talk us through it? What are you thinking right here? Do you have the leader in tow?
Yeah, we had gotten away way back. He doesn't have much gate speed. And we put him in the flow. And coming for the three-quarter pole, he still felt good. And he got by Matt Zuccarello there and kept on going. He's a horse that he sort of has to come off the pace. And but once he comes off that last turn, he knows where he is, and he usually pins his ears back, and he's ready to go down the lane.
And how do you like Justin Verlander's chances tonight?
Yeah, I think I see when Eric drove him last week, he raced pretty good. Again, he was in the flow, and he paced home in 54. So I would think that if I can keep him somewhat close tonight and put him in the flow, he's got a pretty good shot.
Now, Joe, before we let you go, you're driving in the amateur event in the first, but you're driving in a professional race in the fourth behind Boogie Roll, a horse that you own with Joe Torre, I think.
Yeah, Joe's Diamond Pride stable, and we've had this horse since she's a yearling, and she may be in a little tough today, but we'll see how she goes. I drove her a couple weeks ago in the amateur race, and she's good. I like driving her, and I don't get to sit behind mine that often, so and to drive in a pro race, so tonight we'll see how that goes. I'll see if I can hold my own.
Joe Lee, fantastic stuff tonight.
Not a problem.
Good luck this evening driving Justin Verlander in the first and Boogie Roll in the fourth. Thanks again, Joe Lee, for being with us.
All right, thanks, Dave. All right.
Coming up after this, Dave Brower's going to jump in that chair. We'll give out the hardware for this week's trainer and driver and caretaker of the week and look at tonight's featured action.